You're listening to the Baha'i World News
Now
Service.
live local house of worship.
na paglilingkod kay Bahawi. In this episode, we hear from Lynette Kisaka, a member of the Board of Counselors in Africa, Lucy Imison, a member of the Baha'i National Spiritual Assembly of Kenya, Frank Marithi, and Thomas Uma Kongani, who serve in Baha'i agencies at the national level in Kenya, as they discuss how communities across the country are increasingly reflecting on their role in shaping a better future. They describe how through the Baha'i Training Institute that offers moral and spiritual education, people are exploring how personal transformation is connected to the well-being of society. From the Baha'i World News Service, this is In Conversation, a collective exploration by several individuals of the practical application of Baha'i principles to the building of peaceful societies.
It's always so nice to have an opportunity to reflect on the contributions that the Baha'i faith is making towards social transformation in the country. And it would be so nice to kind of just go a little bit into detail about that and just to try to see how this is manifesting itself in the life of our communities.
The condition of the world keeps on going from bad to worse each day. And so everybody is asking themselves, how are we going to make this condition better? And so interestingly, as one begins to interact with the Training Institute, the very first book of the Training Institute, and again the very first quotation that one interacts with, is the betterment of the world can be accomplished through pure and goodly deeds, through commendable and seemly conduct. And then at that first initial interaction, then one begins to reflect about this quotation. How do we make this world better? And what is my contribution as an individual and also collectively as a community? The individual then setting on this path begins to think at these two levels. First, thinking about individual transformation, but also thinking of how to make contributions towards making the world better. The transformative effect of the Training Institute then begins to manifest itself in different ways. One of the experiences that touched me as an example of this is something that happened in one of the regions in Kenya, and this is the central region, where a group of youths who even their parents and the community somehow had lost hope about them. And the Training Institute decided to organize a training, and they invited them. And the environment that was created was such that they would stay there for the period of the training. And so, beginning to interact with the Word of God and reflecting together, at the end of this training, these youths were so changed that when they went back to their communities, even their parents could not imagine what changed these youths. And so when they realized that it was the Training Institute and the study that they were exposed to, then they said that if this is what can change them and transform them this much, then even ourselves, we want to interact with this. And we want more of our children to be part of this.
It is indeed very interesting. So I think in the contemporary context, when we talk about social transformation, probably we're thinking about maybe certain policies or maybe certain technologies that come to kind of affect the life of society. But we see that these changes are somehow superficial. But in order to go a little bit deeper, then this change or this transformation has to happen at the level of the individual. So if this transformation happens at the heart of the individual, then of course we are going to see certain values that are becoming manifest. A reorientation in terms of how we think about the structures of society and the purpose that they're supposed to fulfill. And then we start seeing new patterns of thoughts, new patterns of behavior, new patterns of habits emerging. In Nairobi, there's a locality, it's called Roiro. And in this community, there's a number of universities within this locality. When we talk about the educational endeavors that the Baha'i community is engaged in, one of them is the programs offered by the Institute for Studies in Global Prosperity for university students and students in tertiary institutions. One of the purpose of the program is to raise consciousness in the individuals about who they are, what they do, and the significance of their engagement in action and discourse directed towards social change. And of course, in order for transformation to happen, this knowledge has to be translated into action. A group of these youth, when they went back to their community, they began having some conversations with their peers at the university. So this group of youth invited their friends and they started having some study sessions together. And after these study sessions, there was this consciousness about their role as youth and the responsibility that they bear towards the younger generations. One of the challenges that they encounter within the university environment is that it's a very materialistic kind of environment, and a lot of emphasis is placed on the individual and glorification and the progress of the individual. Through the interaction with the Training Institute, they're reoriented towards service and cooperation. You're beginning to see a certain dynamic happening within this particular community where more and more youth are being invited to take part in this conversation. Of course, there are other elements other than youth. We have other spheres of transformation that are happening within certain populations. One of them is the women and how they're being empowered and how they're rising to fulfill their role.
Yes, when we think about the women and their role through the institute process, we have seen the women being raised and raising their consciousness. I'll share two examples of two regions. Both groups of women was going to do the Training Institute, and that allowed them to begin to have bonds of friendships amongst themselves. And whilst they were doing this, some of the areas that they began to talk about during the Rui Institute is to begin to talk about their lives. How do they boost the income to be able to educate the children that they have? How do we also evolve as women together collectively and begin to think about our economic strengths? So this group of women are now farming together, making production of their food, they sell to the markets, they bring back. They're also able to learn how to mix the kind of farming through their experiences and their trainings. They're taught how to actually utilize their farmland even better. They're making sure that they have enough to be able to sell, there's enough to be able to take the children to school. And the other thing that the women are beginning to do is to have this question of what do we do as women so that we can bring more women closer to us? And so they've started hosting devotional gatherings. For example, they're inviting their friends. And these women then have different homes they visit. Whilst they're visiting, this is where they're sharing and telling each other about themselves. The beauty about this, we are also seeing the younger women. So there's a range of women from the ages of 20 to 80. And these young women are also learning from the older women. We begin to see the transformation within the village. When the women do this, they don't do it alone. We also see they're getting support from their men and their husbands. While they're doing all these activities, the men are in the background ensuring that these activities will actually happen. And so they give them support. And I think from this women group, we are talking of about a spread of no less than 800 plus who have been reached out to and now are beginning to get involved in the service as well.
One interesting thing is we have seen this process evolving from very simple to more complex. Recently, the Northwest region was sharing a path of women conferences that began in 2017. And it began as simple as 17 women gathering and thinking about devotional meetings. In these conferences, they were thinking about how women can be raised as human resources. But then in the most recent gatherings, we have seen now they are thinking beyond community building activities, they're thinking about social endeavors. We were reflecting with the team that in the past few years, when you went in a meeting, the moment you step in a meeting, you see the meeting is full of men. In the recent past, we have seen a great improvement, and it's a result of this follow-up through these women conferences. And now, because they are empowered through the Training Institute, they begin thinking about other aspects. And the most interesting one is about education of children. In one community, that is Mahalanya, among the local leaders, some of them are women. The first concern is about education of children, not just material, but also spiritual education. And this is one community that is leading the way because they have been systematic in a way that now these local leaders are being assisted to go through the sequence of courses. Then when Thomas was sharing about the Training Institute, I was reflecting on the concept of the vision of Baha'u'llah for humanity. One sole purpose for our creation is to live in harmony and concord and contribute to the betterment of society. So in Namarambi village, the village elder of this Namarambi was a member of the local spiritual assembly. And somehow he really tried to apply the teachings of the faith in his leadership. And how it happened is their head observed that this village is doing well. What is it? Because this leader could bring other leaders together and they think about how they can exercise their authority, but in connection with the teachings. Namarambi was used as an example to have a certain approach of leadership. So within this village, then there were different councils that were formed. A council to take care of health, another council for education, another council for security, and another one for agriculture. There emerged a systematic community gathering that is now happening every cycle. And in this community gathering, each member of this council shares what has happened in the past 3 months. After that, then they think about what they will do in the course of the 3 months before they come for another gathering. So the initiative was by the local spiritual assembly, but today now those leaders are taking responsibility.
So interesting when you say that, because I think right now we are starting to see this outward-looking orientation. When you talk about a local spiritual assembly, they're not just thinking about the welfare of the Baha'i community, but they're thinking about the welfare of their entire locality. We feel like, okay, as much as this is a Baha'i process, but it is important to invite the entire community to engage in this process. As we were talking about the Training Institute, and one of the courses of the Training Institute talks about social action. So in Luanda, the temple being like a center of attraction for the community. So some youth would come and then they would just be around the temple and wouldn't be doing anything. So there was this idea like, how can we try to do something creative? And then this idea of coming up with a community radio emerged. And then this youth, many of them who don't have a background in media, they would get a little bit of training, and then eventually there was this process of setting up a community radio. And as this community radio became like a voice for the community, they even formed a WhatsApp group for the community members, which currently has over 1,000+ members in that group. And then they would engage in these conversations where like the community would be asked, what are some of the challenges that we feel we're facing as a community? And then this kind of gave the community a platform for engaging in these conversations. And one of the things that emerged was this initiative of, it's called Stawisha Kilimo. So there are some, a group of farmers, some of who are Baha'is and some who are not. So they would work with a certain agronomic experts, and then they would try to integrate the traditional agricultural practices with some of the scientific practices in order to be able to boost food security in the community, as well as creating employment opportunities for the youth, So they'd have the strategic demonstration plots where some of the farmers who are like the core group would invite their fellow community members. They would come and they would interact together and learn and try to see what works and what doesn't work. And then they would try to adapt the best practices to their own farming, their own farms back at home. And through this effort, you're trying to see, oh, there are actually certain learnings that are emerging, which the community members are applying, and they're starting to see certain effects taking place where, you know, the youth are thinking about agriculture as a viable path of service. And also, it's also creating this consciousness in the community that when we come together, when we put our resources together, and when we think together, then we're able to proceed to progress together as a community. And then, of course, all these initiatives are supported by the local assembly, and the local assembly is starting to be seen as a partner in development of the community.
Just building up on that, this consciousness about the need to empower youth intellectually has really assisted institutions. We have seen an increasing consciousness about the question of how youth can advance intellectually, because it has been observed if they are actually assisted, they even serve better. And then they understand that committing to a life of service is a long-term thing. So just how do they balance between service and also their personal endeavors? And one trend we have seen emerging in the recent past is all youth who are serving are thinking about advancing academically. There are those who are studying, but there are those who had maybe finished just a secondary level and they were comfortable. But with this understanding, we've seen most of them now choosing a career. And how they approach the institutions, they are very open to have a conversation about what they want to do, and they're assisted to explore the possibilities. But when you listen to their thinking, they're not just thinking about studying and that is all, but choosing a career or a profession that will help them serve better, but also achieve their goals, their personal goals as individuals.
In Nairobi, one of the situations where, if you remember, there was an uprising of the youth in Kenya. So one of the things that the External Affairs did was to see how do we have a conversation around making a change. And this was a really beautiful moment where we saw university leaders were invited to a space to come and discuss about the betterment of their future for tomorrow, because it was an economical issue. And during this consultation, how we did it was we read the Rizvan message only with university students. And this allowed the conversations to extend beyond what they anticipated. When this message read, "The youth must sow," the question was asked, what do you mean by the youth must sow? And so these conversations evolved to understanding the principles of the faith and how you can use the principles of the faith to be able to make a change. So a second gathering was followed. Another 25 youth leaders were invited to a space. What was very interesting is that these youth were asking the question, what would the faith like Baha'i do to make a difference in our lives? And so these conversations then were discussed, and they agreed we need another space to be able to understand the faith better, to be able to use these principles where we are, because we've not known that there could be a faith like this that could actually help us in the way we think. So I think when we see the transformation of society and the youth, when they begin to interact with the faith and begin to understand the principles and wanting to use them in their lives, I feel that this kind of interaction will continue, particularly on university level. So I think these conversations have started. We've had 2 meetings, and I think there's more to be built on with the same youth. And the next one, I hear they're inviting about 50 or so youth to come and have these conversations and continue further.
It's very interesting because I remember around that same period, think what became clear was that the youth are very conscious of the failings of society, and they are calling for greater accountability from the institutions of society, from the leadership. The youth were going out to the streets to protest en masse. So one question that the Baha'i youth were asking themselves was like, what is our position? Because we believe in what these youth are advocating for. We believe in greater calls for governance. We believe in greater calls for accountability and transparency in terms of how taxes are being used. But what was the response that was appropriate for Baha'i youth? So how can we engage in constructive discourses that would actually lead to more meaningful action, that would lead to more meaningful conversations? So in many universities, I know many of them started having these conversations with their peers. So of course, what came out very clearly was that we have short-term solutions, but we also have long-term efforts that the Baha'i community is doing. And of course, this kind of helped the youth to try to understand, okay, so what is the impact of these short-term efforts, and what are some of these efforts you're talking about? And then, of course, it connected now to like children classes. How do teaching children classes and working with junior youth, how are these things going to contribute towards the betterment of society? But of course, also the House of Justice tells us that the process of transforming the society is not something that is going to be done by one generation, but it's something that will happen throughout many generations. So the youth were asking themselves, or they were being called to ask themselves, like, what is my responsibility as a youth in this day? So I think this kind of caused the youth to actually think and feel like, oh, actually, I have a responsibility.
Well, one aspect that I wanted to also share is that, of course, the Training Institute seems to be the main driver of all this transformation that we are witnessing. But I think also in Kenya, one other unique tool that seemed to be also beginning to contribute to a lot of transformation is the House of Worship. Because we see, like we were describing, how, these meetings with the community leaders in Luanda, and most of these meetings do actually happen within the precincts of the House of Worship. Many of these interactions with the different organizations do happen again at the House of Worship, and whenever there are such spaces, they would always first go to the House of Worship for prayers. And so this is beginning to also effect a lot of transformation within the Luanda community itself, even outside the Luanda community. As we also know that the House of Worship embodies two aspects of service and worship. So again, as these people interact with the House of Worship, when they go back, they are inspired and they are able to undertake more active role in services.
So in addition to what Thomas has said about the House of Worship, strengthening these two aspects of service and worship, we have seen the House of Worship also strengthening this principle of oneness of humanity. The appreciation of the population that regardless of their religious backgrounds, they are welcome to the House of Worship to say prayers, has really acted as a point of attraction. And beyond that, this has been a place where everyone feels they want to be. And as a result, we have seen some of the local leaders who do their meetings on a monthly basis just naturally identify this as their point of meeting. But since the inauguration of the House of Worship, we have seen different communities organizing to visit the House of Worship. And initially, these visits were just Baha'is. But we have seen now some communities, as they arrange for the visits, they're extending invitations to friends from the wider society. And this connection, we have seen, they have known it as a place where they draw divine confirmations and spiritual inspiration.
You've been listening to In Conversation, a podcast series from the Baha'i World News Service. For more podcasts and stories, visit bwns.org.